This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to the January meeting of the North Front Range Transportation Air Quality Planning Council. Welcome to everybody online and here in the room. Thank you for Mayor Karspek for hosting us here in Berthoud. Let's start by reciting the, almost said national anthem. The Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent, thank you. All right, now is the time for public comment, if we have any. Is there any public in the room? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 1. I will entertain a motion for acceptance of the meeting agenda, assuming everyone's had a chance to read it.
So moved. Sorry.
Get that?
Yes, I think Scott and John.
You're good. Thank you. No further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent, thank you. Next is number 2, the approval of minutes. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of minutes.
I approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, excellent. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, approved. Get some housekeeping out of the way. All right, let's begin with the Lead Planning Agency for Air Quality Agenda. Number 3, Air Pollution Control Division. It's a handout, page 1, written report. Second one is Regional Air Quality Council, RAQC, page 2. Mike, I think, is online, correct?
I see Mike on there, but I'm not sure. Mike, are you presenting or is Tom?
This is Tom Moore. I'll be presenting.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you, Tom. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Council members, I just want to hit the high points of the information we included in our report. The 75 part per billion severe ozone SIP was approved by the AQCC on December 15th at their rulemaking hearing. And I listed the 5 documents, the chapters that were recompleted this year, including a new executive summary. And so we've corrected the emission inventory and modeling issues that were found in 2022. Our client for all this work is the Regional Air Quality Council board, also, of course, the division and the commission. And then ultimately it goes to EPA. So they require a lot of technical support documentation. So there were 10 new technical support documents that were also approved by virtue of the commission approving the SIP. So let me touch quickly on the control requirements that were adopted separately from the commission's approval of the SIP. So these are control programs that will go into place this year, and then they will anchor our attainment of the 75 part per billion SIP. So just mentioning that there's 2 existing regulations that were added to, made more stringent. And the first one is to reduce emissions during the ozone season by oil and gas operators. It applies in particular to the drilling and pre-production operations, the NOx emissions from those engines. This is continuing work that the state of Colorado has taken on to really develop a whole series of comprehensive regulations. Not only do they go into effect this year, there's an effort in this rule to reduce the intensity of NOx emissions combined with continuing production of oil. And so there's a requirement to gradually reduce the intensity of nitrogen oxide emissions. And then finally, there's a separate regulation for stationary engines. Stationary engines are common in all industrial applications. There are many in the upstream oil and gas field, but they also exist at other industrial facilities. And so the division has put forward a new regulation to lower the NOx emissions from those stationary engines statewide. And it includes equipment that is movable but parked at the oil and gas sites while they're drilling. And then the last couple of slides on the next page have to do with the Regulation 29, which is a new regulation that the Commission considered, and it involves reducing emissions from gas-powered lawn and garden equipment. And there was quite a bit of active discussion. The RAC had put forward a proposal through our process, and then the Air Quality Control Division also had a process. So the Commission was trying to evaluate both of those. And what I'm going to do is kind of report what happened. So the Commission approved a kind of a tentative hybrid approach, and they're going to make a further decision on that in February. But the restrictions are on the public agencies. The idea is the government goes first. It includes, as it's listed here, state, local, and federal governments, including education districts, and the contractors that work for those governments and districts, on those facilities. And so that restricts the use of the gas-fired handheld equipment during the hot summer months. This requirement would come into effect in next year in 2025. And that was an attempt, the Commission's trying to align the APCD and RAC proposal there. So that's what they're proposing to do. The restrictions would be statewide for the state agencies, but local governments and obviously school districts and that kind of thing are only affected if they're within the non-attainment area. And then there was a lengthy discussion and the proposal to give significant exemptions for first responders and emergency situations, fires, storm cleanup, that kind of thing. So there will be language in the hybrid regulation that provides those exemptions. And then just to clarify, the last piece of information is what the regulation is not likely not to include. And it's not going to include any sales restrictions, which was part of the proposal the RAC put forward. And it will not include any restrictions on the same equipment by private operators, doing lawn maintenance on contracts that they have with private entities. It does not restrict or stop any use by residents of their existing gas-powered equipment. They were never included in the proposal, and neither the division nor the RAC had any plans to restrict that. So in February, when the AQCC meets on their regular schedule, they will make a formal decision. And in the meantime, final language is being prepared to codify what I just summarized. So that's a quick report on the Commission meetings and the actions taken in mid-December. Happy to try and take any questions.
John, let's not get formal around here, John.
No, well, I just didn't want to just jump in like I normally do. Tom, wasn't the original proposal that sales of handheld gas-powered motors and everything were to end by 26? Did that come off the table, or was I thinking something different?
No, you're correct. It was proposed in the RAC proposal, and the Commission considered both the RAC proposal and the division's proposal, and they decided not to adopt a sales ban of any kind.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Any discussion? All right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Move on to number 5 on the agenda, the air quality program updates. You can read along with Dina on page 12 of the packet. Dina, I saw you online.
Yes, hi there. Dina Voitalk with Two Roads Environmental. So Tom really gave you the bulk of what I was going to talk about tonight, so I don't need to belabor most of that. But December was a busy month, both for the Commission, the RAC, and the interim legislative committee on ozone. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm only going to add in terms of the commission's likely adoption of a rule with lawn and garden equipment in February is that it also includes a concept about soft enforcement. There was a lot of discussion about the outreach that was performed and that more is needed. But there was also some discussion about the need for soft compliance because not all public entities that may be regulated are ready to fully comply in 2025. And so I just wanted to highlight that they are intending to kind of take this softer approach that allows regulated entities to comply. But if they cannot, they have to document as to why they can't and keep some records related to it, and then report that at a later time. So I just wanted to highlight that in addition to Tom's summary. The RAC is in the process of putting out a request for proposal, accepting bids for modeling contracts to carry out the modeling activities that's needed for SIP development. And this process could afford the opportunity to use basically AI to look a little bit closer at background ozone levels. And that's related to a paper that North Front Range NPO staff shared with the RAC in November. So we are tracking that and encouraging the RAC to try to incorporate that into any final contract that's let. Ozone planning efforts are transitioning at the RAC and the Air Division to developing the 2015 Serious Ozone SIP. So the RAC has identified some potential additional reduction opportunities associated with oil and gas, transportation, idling, and indirect sources, or sources like warehouses or large box stores or malls that either own or operate large fleets or attract a significant number of mobile sources to them. We saw some insights. We got some insights in terms of what we might see in terms of the legislative session that's kicking off here from the Legislative Committee on Ozone. In particular, Senator Winter indicated her interest in potential legislation on increasing protections for, and that's air quality protections for disproportionately impacted communities. And so we might see some things related to permitting of air pollution sources and enforcement of the regulations. Representative Wilford also mentioned potential legislation relating to air quality permitting of smaller sources, or what we call minor sources. And also, was there a question?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Also, given the interest in lawn and garden equipment and the regulation of that, I think it's safe to say that we may see some, interest in seeking additional resources to provide outreach, to provide that soft enforcement that's needed in terms of implementing the regulation, and then obviously to incentivize or drive the market share of alternatives to gasoline-powered small lawn and garden equipment. With that, I will close out just saying there is an upcoming meeting with the RAC control strategy on the 17th. The Air Quality Control Commission does not have a meeting this month, and they'll come back in February. And I think that is it. So are there any questions?
Any questions for Dina? See nothing, any further discussion? If not, thank you so much, Dina. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, let's move on to the Metropolitan Planning Organization agenda. Up first is reported to chair. I guess that's me. I had some housekeeping things, take care of most of the committee work, to update on everybody what our thinking is, and hopefully we can get a couple volunteers in appropriate places. But let's start with the stack. That's an appointment by the chair. I've decided to appoint in my stead Johnny Olson and myself as the alternate. I think Johnny's okay with that. If not, it's your last chance. So Johnny Olson as primary and myself as the alternate. Next comes the finance committee. Currently, we got a chair of Johnny Olson that's required as the vice chair takes the chair of the finance committee. We got Paul, we got Kristen, we got Mark Clark, and we do have a vacancy on this committee. And I will just say from my personal experience, this is a good committee to be on if you're new to the MPO. I think you'll learn a lot about background and what's going on, et cetera. So do I have any volunteers? If there's more than one, we'll, I don't know, draw straws or something, but.
This is interesting, Mr. Wilson, are you, I know you might be our next Windsor representative no matter what. If Paul's term limited, right?
Yeah, Paul's term limit, so he'll be done sometime in April, yeah. Whatever the
So
new
we can't really
mayor's
appoint, can we appoint two from the same? If you're interested, I'm sorry, I'm kind of volunteering you, but.
Well, I think let's point one now, and when
If Paul goes, then you got another opening, okay.
Yeah.
We'll recruit then.
I tried.
So do I have one? I hear anyone?
Sure, I'll do.
You should?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been on there before, I can do it again.
Matt's kind of new. Let's.
If you
Yeah,
want,
Paul.
please, I was just trying to fill a seat, sure.
I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
Nobody else would like to.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, so that fills that committee, and then when Paul comes up in April, we'll do what we need to do then. So next is Human Resources Committee. That's full. The chair is Scott. Congratulations, Scott. Kristen, Will, Troy, and Tricia fill out the human resources. And just as a heads up, they're going to have some work to do.
They are.
Well, it's the decision of the chair of the HR committee that no, we won't.
No, we
That's right. She can't quit. I'm sorry,
That's right.
there's no retirement.
No retirement.
Sorry, Suzette.
Hand her down.
All right, just so everybody knows, our RAC representative is Kristen. Thank you. Assuming you're willing to stay on.
Yeah, and it's appointed, like you then get appointed by the governor, so I feel like I'm on,
I didn't know where you were in your 3-year term though.
I had been reappointed, I think, at one point, so, I think I'm
You're there.
a year in or something.
Okay, good, thank you. And let's move on to the Front Range Passenger Rail District. This is kind of interesting because we got 2 representatives currently, one from each county. We weren't quite sure who was 2-year and who was 4-year. What we decided, what we recently decided was that, see if I get this right. Johnny was 4-year, right? So you'll stay on, you're not in your head, you're okay with it. And then, Well County Rep was yes, yeah, 24 to 28.
No, so your term will be 22, you were appointed in 22, so you'll go on to 24. You are bringing up to 26.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next rep from the Laramie County side.
Okay, and I'm going to take that one unless somebody wants to challenge me for that.
For this term?
When it expires.
When
The
it
next
expires,
one.
gotcha.
So they currently expire are in May. So
We do have time to, yeah, let's just,
I think you do have somebody that would like to challenge you.
yeah, that's good. The question is, if we do it now or in May. So,
I'm also interested in it,
okay, all right,
but maybe we can do it.
yeah, well, let's not do it tonight.
No, it's
It's, because I did not bring straw, so.
not.
So this 2-year, when is that term? Is that this year we're talking about?
Yeah, and I know that Andy is online because he's going to be doing a presentation tonight. When I talked to him, he said that it was better to make these appointments sooner rather than later. I think our appointments, according to the resolution we passed, go through May. And when I went back and read through the language in the bill, it said the first meeting had to be held by May of 2022. So I think that's, to me, it seems like the May timeframe is when the transition happens. But Andy, if you're online, is that correct?
I don't think we held our first meeting until like December.
No, but the appointments were by May. Then we sat around trying to do bylaws for a couple of months. Well, I'd be interested for the next two. I didn't know we were just talking about till 2 more months, or 3 more months till the next appointment. But yeah, we got 4.
You've been on 2 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would say is that until November, it's going to be pretty, I mean, if you just come in May, you're gonna be way behind from May to November.
I agree. I just think that was a lot of work to get where we are, but I'm not gonna,
I think Andy wants to offer his 2 cents right there.
Where is it?
He's online. Andy's online.
He's trying.
Let's try it.
No, he's okay. He's good.
Talk. Well, he's not muted.
Hang on, Andy, we're trying. We're trying to get you unmuted.
Well, can a person serve a
Got
second
me on your
term?
side.
Yes, there are no term limits.
Oh,
And you can even serve if you're not currently an elected official, but a past elected official.
that's what this brings us to.
I mean, I'm okay with Will staying on too.
Well, my thoughts were, I mean, if the hatchet gets buried for birthday, which might happen, the 2-year would make sense. So people are getting this stop for Collins, Loveland, have a chance to represent, because our voice wouldn't matter anymore, but I'd like to stay on it until this goes to the ballot.
And I think that's probably the key turning point, so I think November is the key turning point.
Well, we just can't change terms.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, maybe you put him in until the ballot's over, and then we can
Switch out.
switch out.
So he doesn't have to serve his full term.
I don't know, I'm trying to get Andy unmuted.
Just,
Well, if Will said I'm off, I'm not gonna do it again, you're gonna have to replace it.
Sure.
And I think the legislation that Andy's running, I'll try to speak for him a little bit, he can correct me until he gets on. Can you hear us and can you hear yourself? Can't hear
I
you
can
still.
hear you, but I can't hear me.
That's it. But I think you're doing some cleanup, right, on the bills this year, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Sorry about the audio confusion. Yeah, just to clarify, we are happy having both Will and Johnny stay on. The first 2-year term was just to stagger the ongoing 4-year terms that the board of directors will have. It's just we didn't want to have all of them at the same time. So there's a 4-year term. 2 years later, the next 4-year term will continue on. So there was that initial 2-year term. So that's how we'll move forward. And then we are clarifying in the cleanup language. Right now it says April, where the nominations from or the appointments from the NPOs would take place. That's still being, there's some other board members that think January may be better because it's earlier on and we can bake that into a process. This is our first time around on this, so it's during this transition, during the interim, it's going to be a little bit weird between the January and the May when the NPOs appointed the boards, appointed the directors to the board in the beginning. So we're happy to be flexible. We can work with the NPO. We can work with you all. Whatever you need, we can make it work. We like both of our directors.
And the other thing is, in your cleanup language, the MPOs won't have to be approved by the governor, right?
That's right. And just a quick point on that, there's 10 directors that are on the board from the MPOs. There are 6 from the governor. These 6 from the governor were appointed by the Senate last time, but they didn't get around to the 10 from the MPOs. So we figured administratively, with how busy that the Senate, the confirmations happen, how busy they are, 10 additional confirmations is administratively difficult. So we had a conversation with our board about whether it mattered or not. And generally the consensus was administratively it'd be difficult. The Senate, it makes sense to have kind of an oversight of the governor's appointees. That's kind of already in many cases in the boards and commissions. But from the local level, Senate oversight of what the NPOs are, it didn't necessarily make sense. You all have a process in place and you all are able to make the best decision. So that's what we were thinking.
So what I'm hearing is that we're allowed to let the terms go through the end of the year, and then we'll then decide who's to and who's for.
Well, anything going forward is for.
Okay, yeah, going forward. So we may have 3 or 4 people in the hat come, I guess we'll do it in January.
Well,
Yeah,
if it's getting close to the election, I guess it's like.
Yeah, I think January would be good.
All
So
right.
next January.
Yeah, because I think you'll be seeing the SDP and everything starting to come to fruition where there's gonna be a lot of discussion with locals. And then you'll get into the NEPA process. Andy, I'm speaking out of turn, but I heard this in the planning committee the other day. So then they'll start getting into a new process that's gonna really drive a different set of discussions, right? And I think January is a good trade-off point because then a lot of the stuff that we've been battling over the last 2 years is going to be, the train is gonna be down the tracks.
Okay.
So that works for the others.
That's good, I caught that.
Yeah.
Went right over my head. Well,
If you say that works for the other applicants, or.
well, I was just gonna say, is that everybody on the council okay with that? Not your heads?
Yes. And I understand, no matter how Bertha is being treated, I'm also in here for loving Fort Collins, so.
Well,
yeah,
Trying to help you out.
Yeah, there's nothing to keep us from calling you.
Yeah, exactly.
One way
Yeah.
or another.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we're always available. I mean, Loveland and Fort Collins are in. Where those are is going to be up to Loveland and Fort Collins.
Right.
Bertha's just got a 90-mile-an-hour train. He was told going through his community with no at-grade crossings. That's what upset Bertha. So there's just a lot of discussion going on.
All right, super. Thanks for everyone.
And Greeley, by the way, doesn't get it. So it's just, I'm just there.
So then, Andy, just to follow up with you, do I just need to send you something? Do we need to pass a resolution saying that we're going to be re-upping our current representatives? Since we have a resolution that said that, you want me to send you another one?
Yeah, Susan, if you would, like an updated resolution, just formalizing it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You.
Anything else? All right, let's move on to number 7. That's the executive director report.
Okay. So I have a few things, and I think one of them we already just talked about. So upcoming legislation, the legislative session is now ongoing. There are a couple of items. One that we just talked about on the Front Range passenger rail, sort of that cleanup piece. There is another Senate bill, 24-32, concerning methods to increase the use of transit. This is talking about having a statewide transit pass, which they're talking about creating a statewide transit pass for everybody. They're going to set up a committee in 2026 and have something to implement by 2028. The ozone season transit grant, that thing is going to start going indefinitely for the zero fare. So I think for all of us that had we talked about this before. They're talking about a youth fare-free transit program, and then also an income tax credit in the amount of 30% of the amount spent by the taxpayer. So those are some of the things that are coming up so far at the legislative session, along with the passenger rail changes. The other thing is that we, after a decennial census, and the census defines our urbanized areas, and so we have a transportation management area and one urbanized area. The transportation management area is that sort of orangish color that you see there, and then the other one is the Greeley area, which is more of that green area. So as the census defines that area, they just sort of don't do a really good job of being very specific around the edges. So all of us, CDOT and NFRMPO, we work together to say what internally are outer boundaries and not change, but what internally makes sense to clean up. So these are the cleanup part of this is things like on US 34, there are some areas that they go from urban to rural to rural to urban, and that makes it really not very clean when you're talking about FHWA dollars and how those are spent. So this is just a cleanup. It doesn't really, it affects nothing on the FTA side of the house. It's just for Federal Highway Administration uses, so we can clean up both definitions. Questions on that?
I just wanted to say that there's also the vulnerable user, road users.
Oh, you
bill.
mean on the legislative session?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, and that one is about, that, vehicles of a certain weight would have to pay a fee. I think it's $5, and, there, I guess, from what I understand, is vehicles that would be more likely to be involved in a pedestrian or a bicycle fatality. And that fee would be used to fund an enterprise that would have about $20 million a year that would go towards, just like the other enterprises that were created under 260, that would, that people could apply the grants to that enterprise that would work on safety issues in your community. So whether it's pedestrian and bike infrastructure or it's intersection improvements, but those dollars would be used for that. And so that is, I think that that's up really soon.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I missed that one. And that's Senate Bill 24036. If you're interested in that.
And then I think that there's, I don't know how soon this one's coming up, but the transit-oriented communities is another bill that is coming up. Yeah, it's one of the land use bills, but it's specifically around transit-oriented communities and unlikely to, well, it affects municipalities more than it affects counties, so. But that one would be, I mean, I heard that there was a proposal, I don't think this will go through, CML will probably kill us, but to take away HUTF dollars if people aren't in compliance, and I don't know how soon they would have to be in compliance with, by 2026, Tricia's saying, with some of the transit-oriented communities.
It's gonna be a hard sell.
That is,
That's
I got.
one piece of the last bill that sort of tripped everybody. It's
Well, I
because
think-
against home rule decisions.
Well, I think targeting HUTF dollars is just not a, I mean, doesn't seem, like nobody's gonna want, everybody relies on those dollars. So I think that they may look at different dollars or other dollars that people would or wouldn't be eligible, or if you have created a transit-oriented community that you would be eligible or you'd be first in line for some of these other dollars. I don't know. I think there's a lot of things being
The
done.
carrot instead of the stick approach.
Well, right, exactly. So, I guess to be seen, but that's another one to keep your eye on, especially if you're in a municipality.
Yeah, I think maybe Nathan will be talking about that later on the.
Oh, is that?
What's this, the housing legislation?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't know that jumped the gun.
So anyhow, so thank you for all that. Figure that we'll probably get a lot of people in this room, probably know more legislative activities than I do, so. So anyhow, to finish up on the urban boundaries, so I think that has all been submitted and we're up and running on that, if I see that. The other piece that we have is in the handouts, you'll see our 2023 annual report from the NFRMPO staff. You'll see pictures of people in there that you recognize. So, yeah. Yeah, so anyhow, you will see some pictures in there of the events that happened throughout 2023. So take a look at that when you get a chance. Also, you will look at on page 15 of the handout is our Bango annual survey. It's just a summary of our survey every year. We go out and survey our band poolers and see what kind of a job we're doing. And, give ourselves a big pat on the back. We do a great job and they like the service that they get from us. And we get pretty high marks on everything. And also thanks to the city of Fort Collins and the city of Loveland for the fleet, sorry, not city of Loveland, city of Greeley, for the fleet maintenance. We get very high marks on that as well. So good job, everybody, all the way around.
I would like to say annual report looks fantastic. Thank you to you and your staff. Very good.
Yeah, staff did a great job on that, no doubt. Yeah, so, and that is all I have.
Okay. Number 8, under reports is the TAC, that's in the packet. Written report. Number 9 is Community Advisory Committee, that is also in the packet, written report. Which brings us to presentations. Andy, you're up again with, I believe, David as well, with the Front Range Passenger Rail District update.
Thank you all. I'm gonna let David kick us off and take it away, David. Thank you.
Good evening. Can everyone see the slides up on? Okay, great. Well, thank you again for having us. My name is David Singer. I am the Assistant Director of Passenger Rail with CDOT's Division of Transit and Rail. And we are going to walk through, let me get my orientation here again, I apologize. A combination of technical update, and I'm happy to lead us through the service development plan and some of the achievements and accomplishments, but also preview our current work and the work ahead throughout this busy 2024. I'll turn it over to Andy to talk about the district activities, also recognizing that Johnny Olson, Will Karspeck, and also on the call, John Putnam are sitting board members who can also really inform that conversation. Quick primer, apologize for repeat holding slides, but Front Range Passenger Rail is the idea of intercity train service. The goal and the charge for us is to introduce new service, and the focus is from Pueblo to Fort Collins with stops along the way. There is a longer term vision to expand north to Wyoming and south to New Mexico, and the definition scope has been narrowed to using existing tracks along freight railroads. It lowers the price of entry, it accelerates the start date, and it's a best practice throughout the country. Service development plan is a federal term of art for corridor development. It's a FRA grant that CDOT is acting as the sponsor, but in doing so, kind of the technical support in support of the district. We are halfway through, and some of the highlights and definitions similar to what we used to see as a PEL is identifying major characteristics, the route, the markets and stations, how many trains we expect, what's the necessary infrastructure to provide that type of service, what might the fare structure look like, what might technology for the trains look like, what are the costs to provide that infrastructure, what are the costs for O&M long term, what might a financial plan look like, and then again, a pipeline of projects for us to advance into NEPA and ultimately project delivery. So I want to highlight some of our accomplishments at the technical level. We talked about route, and specifically for your community, there were 3 routes under considerations. There are 3 series of tracks moving through the North Front Range. And we looked at several factors, including market analysis, connection with multimodal benefits, the legislative intent in class planning, but also the rail infrastructure itself through the Great Western, through the Greeley sub, and the North Front Range subdivision. We also compared the route length and geometry. And in December, the board took action in a resolution to recommend that the Front Range subdivision is the most viable route to start our focus on. It doesn't preclude the ability to examine other routes, but given the charge is narrow and not really looking at a long-term vision for all possible routes, it landed on the Front Range sub. The other thing that we're starting to understand is using our statewide transportation model is to understand ridership. And we're doing an alternatives analysis. We'll be looking at number of frequencies, whether it's 4 or 6 or 8 or 12, but we're starting to compare some of these ridership numbers to other services across the country. And when benchmarked against some of those, it fares well. We're not lagging behind other mature services, so it gives us confidence that this would be a viable service. And we've, again, also looked at travel times and understanding what there's now relative to whether it's Pueblo to Fort Collins, it is competitive with other modes, looking to that horizon year. Now, having said that, we could always do better, and we recognize that infrastructure improvements, whether it's curve straightening or even what we call super elevation of tilting the tracks a little bit, or other modernization can make the tracks go even faster, make the time go even faster. So our focus in negotiating with the railroads is to see what type of infrastructure, and is the juice worth the squeeze, and what kind of bang for the buck we might get from those kind of capital investments. So we're right now, in the coming months, we're focusing on station area outreach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. We are generating a revenue model to understand what might initial service yield in terms of fares. We'll sharpen the pencil and understand a little bit more about ridership, looking at different variations and variabilities and scenarios. The critical path for us is working with the railroads and understanding how this vision impacts their bottom line and their service. Their expectation and is to their shareholders and to their customers is how are they made whole. And so we're working very closely with the Union Pacific and the BNSF. And we're also doing environmental contacts similar to a PEL to get us ready so that we can move quickly through NEPA, doing kind of a desktop search, talking with stakeholders and agencies on what those sensitive issues are and what those constraints are throughout the study. So coming back to the idea of primary markets, you see here the big dots on the map. We've conducted a market analysis using DOLA projections for economic centers and population centers today, but also on the horizon. And because of the spacing, you see these large communities. And so we're starting to talk, it's a combination of CDOT staff, project staff, and Chrissy has been leading the charge as well for the district, talking with Fort Collins and Loveland and Larimer to meet them where they are. What's their interest? What's their readiness? Providing lessons learned and tools from up and down the corridor, what worked in Pueblo and Colorado Springs as they independently launched station area planning exercises. So we can talk about what's transferable, what's the criteria that help those communities identify locations, compare those locations, and ultimately make recommendations. We want to understand what the transit connections are today and on the horizon. What are the opportunities and constraints with these communities? And so that partnership is underway. There was tremendous enthusiasm and excitement from planning staff from all of those entities. And so that's something that is ongoing. And as we race to wrap up the service development plan, like I said, negotiating with the railroads, understanding what the costs are to build this, but also an ongoing expectation for O&M. We don't want to shortchange ourselves. Understanding what can be generated from various sources, including fares, but also understanding what those other sources for financing exist, and then trying to understand how this can be delivered in distinct phases and distinct projects. I will throw it to Andy to continue on to talk about the priorities, and then maybe we can have an opportunity to come back and answer any technical questions that you may have. Andy, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Thank you very much. So for the district priorities for you all, moving into the next year, we're going to be obviously focusing on increasing the capacity for the district, working with the stakeholders, and building the coalition on a variety of different levels. At the federal level, we're having conversations with FRA around the federal funding opportunities, the Corridor ID program that the district has been accepted into. At the state level, we're going to be having conversations during the legislative session, of course. During the next 6 months, also, we're going to do a focus with some consultants on some concerted outreach and coalition building efforts around a couple of variety of reasons all along the corridor. And then at the local level, Just like David talked about, we're working with CDOT on the station planning efforts with the communities in the along the corridor as well. Um, Working with CDOT on the service development plan, there's a lot of conversations about how to make this go faster, not only because of the political timelines that we have in the state, but also because of the reality and the timelines that we're facing at a federal level in regards to maximizing our federal dollars. And so obviously working with with our CDOT team on that. I think the next slide is also priorities. I got tons of priorities. All right, I got more priorities. Working with, as I mentioned, the station planning, coordinated communications, building those coalitions, and engaging the state legislature. So, next slide. I think that's it. And so maybe back to you, David.
We'll open it up for questions. Really, that we wanted to save enough time for discussion. So we were happy to dig deeper on any of those items.
Super, thank you. Any questions for Andy and or David?
I have a question. So when you talk about the cleanup bill, the potential cleanup bill in this legislative session, what is being cleaned up?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So what we're looking at with the cleanup bill is over the last year or so, we've noticed certain things that we do need to do administratively, such as conforming the statutory language in the bill with some bylaws conversations around what constitutes a quorum. We're talking about what it takes for the board to have the conversations when we get to the point, like Director Olson said, when we are really talking about the nitty gritty and negotiating with railroads or talking about a rail provider. Those guys are also on our board. And so we just wanted to clarify that the board has the ability to, remove ex officio members in order to have policy discussions. That's a conversation. There's also conversations, I'm looking at my list here, updating folks such as all the NPOs and the CDOT and RTD, clarifying that the entire board of the district doesn't have to be there. It could be, interpreted that way. So again, just clarifying that. Also opportunity to do it virtually like this and have directors attend virtually, not in person. We're talking about allowing the general manager to do some contracting within the limits of the approved procurement process that the board approved. Technically, per the statute, the board only has the power to enter into a contract, even though administratively the GM has to do that. We talked about the terms. We also talked about the language in the bill. The original language says before we go to the ballot, we need to do a variety of things, but one of them is publish a service development plan. We're striking service development because that's a federal planning process that doesn't necessarily lend itself to other timeframe realities, and just say a plan, where it says, but it's like a plan, basically the business plan, the financial plan, and the operation plans need to be presented to the public before the district goes to the ballot. So we clarified that. And Commissioner, there's a few other things, but you get a sense of kind of these things. I'm happy to go into more if you'd like.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I just was curious and I just wondered what, if it was anything controversial. It sounds like things that have come up during the, administration of the authority. So that makes sense.
And I will tell you, setting up a new state board government is not easy.
Oh.
It's not easy.
Well, right, and then
It's
you're
painful.
bound by that statute, which can or doesn't necessarily anticipate all the things that will come up during that. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, what's the discussion been around ballot initiative and timing around that?
Yeah. So the district and the state and other partners are all working together to try and figure out the answer to that. We're looking, obviously the legislative session impacts that decision. We're still acting like we do want to go to a ballot in 24. There's still good political reasons for us to go to a ballot in 24, but we all recognize that's a heavy lift, and that's a big lift, as you can all imagine. We are negotiating, we're working with the county clerks to make that happen. We're working on developing credible ballot language and data with the service development plan in order to inform the process. We're all trying to work together as best we can and quickly as we can in order to get an answer. And we're hoping to have an answer on whether we go or no go by the end of March, beginning of April conversation, around the time when the legislature gets to the long bill, and we're about halfway through the legislative session there.
How does that affect the relationship, the ongoing development with the Fed?
So that's one of the reasons. It's a complex answer, and I'll try and do my best to keep it short. On the federal level, going to the ballot, being successful at the ballot means at the federal level, we are able to draw down and leverage and really become the Front Range Passenger Railroad, right? There's going to be funding for it. We can leverage the funding for the financing. We enter into that kind of echelon. That's what the ballot measure approval would happen. If it failed, then obviously that would jeopardize and lessen our competitive edge. However, we still have the partnership with the state. We still have state support from the legislature, so it wouldn't kill the whole project. Obviously, it wouldn't make us as competitively advantaged, in the environment that we're in. So that's one answer to it. I also think, going to the ballot now, obviously, not only just the politics, but drawing down the federal dollars is the biggest impetus for us to try and maximize the opportunity that we're in right now. That's a huge motivation with being able to draw down federal dollars at like a 90-10 ratio or an 80-20 ratio for a project of this size is a massive opportunity for a new corridor and a new project like this, where we are. So I hope that answered your question.
And Commissioner, one of the things that we heard very loud and clear is if you are not a go, no go by May, the longer you wait, it just doesn't work well. The struggle that we have is the SDP is not gonna be completed, so we gotta have enough information. We gotta have enough information to give to the voters to say, hey, this makes sense. If you go to the ballot and you don't have the good information and people are just, it's hard to understand, we all know what that looks like, right? It's just not good for us. But when we do this and we get the pass, the federal dollars, we got seed money for federal dollars due to the vote. And that doesn't mean that, like Andy said, the general fund legislature doesn't say, we're gonna give you the seed money to go after money. But it just looks much better when you have a tax or initiative like this that passes than makes it a lot
Sure, the
easier.
federal dollars are there now, and there's, what do you see as the main competitors then at this point, statewide, wise, for those dollars that we'll be chasing? What are the competitors?
I would say California is our biggest competitor. They're ready. They've
Yeah.
got projects ready to go. They've had conversations. They're in a good place as well. Now, with that said, I will also let you know that, part of, the district was accepted into this corridor ID program, we were one of two new corridors of around, I think it was 30 plus, that were accepted into a 3-step program. We were accepted in at step 2 because of the planning and the efforts and the support that we do have. So that, right, it continues our competitive edge on that. So again, that's what we're looking at.
There's not a lot of competition in Colorado. I mean, we're not gonna compete in FRA dollars in Colorado.
Who was the second? Who was the number 2 competitor then?
I don't know.
You
Do
said
you
there
know,
was 2
David or John?
Yeah, there's another one in Georgia or maybe Minnesota who's kind of one step ahead, but there are 67 other sponsors starting at step 1, and so we've got maybe a year head start on other corridors looking to introduce service.
And this is John Putnam from CDOT, just to confirm that the other step 2 project is from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. So they're, one of those areas of competition.
We could take them.
So it would be gone, the federal dollars would be gone past 2024. So there's no we just keep saying that this is it. 26, I mean, sorry. So this thing is definitely gonna expire?
I'll let John answer that. John really knows the ins and outs on that. Please, John.
Sure. So under the infrastructure law that was passed by Congress and signed by the president, it provided advanced appropriations through fiscal year 2026. So we expect that the money will be awarded by the end of 2026 for the discretionary grant programs. It is possible that Congress will award, designate and appropriate more money, but we don't want to count on that, especially given how fraught any budgetary issues are in Washington right now.
Yeah, continuous resolution could happen. They're gonna have to do something, right? When you get to the end of October of 26, it's gotta be a continuous resolution, or it's gonna have to be a new infrastructure bill, or, and once we get into continued, we all remember what the continuous resolutions look like. There's no guarantee from year to year, and it just gets really painful. Predicting things is harder, and you start getting more doubt.
Sure, but that's understandable. Just sounds like a popular program. Congress axing it, maybe wouldn't be popular either.
Depends on if your money's going to your state or not.
Right, yeah, if you're Minnesota, Colorado, or Georgia, yeah.
And administrations, congressional administrations and administrations change.
Sure, but even under Republican, I mean, EV programs have been strong, wind programs. So.
Andy, a question on your cleanup bill. Do you have a sponsor? Do you have language? Does this be the appropriate place to amend said bill to perhaps alter the boundaries of the district?
I'm always happy to have conversations with you, sir. You know that. Look forward to that. The bill has been introduced. It's House Bill 1012. The sponsors are Senator Zenzinger in the Senate, and we have a co-sponsorship with Pueblo Representative Trish Morrow, as well as Fort Collins Representative Bosenecker. So yeah, it's 1012.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Any more questions or discussion? Anybody on? Seeing none online, anything further here? Not, I will thank Andy, David, and John. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, okay. Number 11 on the agenda is proposed Colorado housing legislation. We've got Nathan online, I believe, as well as John Moore. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thanks for having us. And
Super.
oh, perfect. So I'm just giving you share permission, so I'll start the slide showing us.
Yep, take it away.
All right. Can you all see the presentation?
I can see it, so.
Okay, perfect.
Guessing you can too.
All right. Thanks for having us. So I'm John Moore. I'm a policy advisor in the governor's office. I cover transportation, land use, and environmental issues. And before joining the governor's office, I was a city planner at City of Arvada for 5 years. So I always enjoy talking to folks at the local level and being able to nerd out on some planning and policy issues. And Nathan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Nathan Lindquist. I'm a senior land use planner at CDOT. For these purposes, I'm kind of on loan. In past life, I was a planning director out in Rifle on the West Slope before I came to CDOT. So I'm working with the Gov's office to help on the housing and land use legislation this year. So good to talk with you all.
Yeah, and we have a presentation to run through. I think we're gonna try and run through it fairly quickly, but we'll send out all the slides afterwards. And I think we're expecting some new draft bill language early next week that we can also forward on to make sure that gets shared out. But just want to let folks know we will probably be breezing through things pretty quickly, but we'll make sure you get the full slide presentation afterwards. So as I think most folks know, and if you listen to the governor's State of the State address this morning, we have about $136 million set aside in the governor's budget $65 million of that for new housing, specifically near transits, $18 million for to help communities and local governments build more accessory dwelling units, $60 million in space to create tax credits for new housing units, placemaking, revitalization, another $10 million for technical assistance around things like updating comprehensive plans, updating zoning, things like that. $5 million for adaptive reuse tax credits, another $5 million for historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and then some short-term rental tax fairness proposals. So just high level, the governor has made it very clear that housing and building structures to create a more affordable housing environment in the state is one of his top priorities. And I think one of the things that we heard a lot last year was that there was not enough money tied into a lot of the proposals to support local governments making good planning practices in these areas. So we wanted to come back this year and make sure that we were providing that financial support that's really necessary to help local governments move in that direction. So the three bills that we'll talk about tonight and that we're really focused on is a strategic growth bill, accessory dwelling units bill, and transit-oriented communities bill. Overall, this session, again, is, we're really focused on affordable housing and I think are very cognizant of how a lot of the debate and conversation played out last session. We really, I think, took some time over the summer and early fall to take a step back and try and have as open and transparent of a process as possible. We've been meeting with local governments, stakeholders, interest groups almost weekly for the past several months, really trying to dig into some of these details and refine them, which is, again, why we're wanting to present here this evening to you. And if you all are interested in having us back in the future, would be also happy to come back and present then as well. On the strategic growth bill, I'll just give a quick high-level overview since some of these details are still being worked out. But very basically, this was part of the Senate Bill 213 from last session, that there was a lot of agreement and alignment around of creating a kind of state framework for local housing needs plans, a statewide housing analysis, integrating some strategic growth ideas into transportation planning, and then tweaking local comprehensive plan updates. And, really, I think the goal behind this bill is to build a strong planning foundation so that we have a solid understanding of what our housing needs are at a state, local, regional level, and how we can move forward in those directions. The next bill is accessory dwelling units. For this, again, and I think one thing that I'll emphasize with all these bills that I don't think we can ever emphasize enough is that no single piece of legislation is going to be the silver bullet that solves the statewide housing issue. So we want to acknowledge that, but also make sure that we are moving forward with common sense kind of strategies and goals that can help improve the situation. And that's exactly what ADUs are. They're in association with single family homes. They can fit in most people's backyards. They're more affordable than traditional homes and can allow seniors and other family members to age in place in their communities. So that's really kind of the core goal behind this, in addition to recognizing that other states that have passed some kind of state level framework for accessory dwelling units have really seen them be constructed, primarily because right now, with so many different jurisdictions having so many different rules about what can be built where and how, financial institutions don't have a great market for lending products to get ADUs constructed. So there's an initial just massive hurdle for homeowners to access financing for things like this. And one of the best ways to unlock more of that general financing is to create kind of standardized processes, rules, procedures throughout a larger region, so that financial institutions can mitigate their risk and understand what can actually get built in a region. So that's kind of a core goal underpinning this bill. Again, I'll kind of move through these, but generally the criteria would apply to municipalities within NPOs over 1,000 people, parts of counties and NPOs that are census designated places over 10,000 people, and then any other jurisdiction that would want to opt in to get access to grants and financing that I'll talk to in just a minute. And one thing I'll just mention is that I think this would qualify about just under 70 jurisdictions that would be required to meet this criteria. About half of them already allow ADUs by right. Another quarter or so allow ADUs in some circumstances and things like that. So there's already a lot of recognition that this is happening. But again, the main things that this would be doing is ensuring that the size of ADUs is consistent throughout the region, that there aren't burdensome owner occupancy requirements, which is another thing that we've really heard is a challenge for getting financing for ADUs. And then leaving the decision as whether or not parking is required to the homeowner, or whether or not they need to build a parking space for the ADU. And then basically just making sure that any other design restrictions, things like that, are consistent with whatever would be required for a single family home. And again, there's some other things around short-term rentals, restrictions, parking for ADA. These are decisions that we would, the local government would still have the ability to regulate things like short-term rentals and other things that are really hyper-localized to a market that we want to preserve. As far as the innovative grants and financing, there's kind of two steps here. One is a fee reduction grant program, and so that would be for any jurisdiction that has technical assistance. They lower tap fees or permit fees or anything like that. The state would provide support for local governments to be able to do that, to lower some of that initial cost of entry. And these things vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but at a high level, one of the things that can add expense to an EDU is things like $10,000 or $20,000 tap fees and things like that. So for jurisdictions that are lowering those requirements, the state will offer backfill support for that. And then working with CHAFA, providing some financing to buy down some interest rate points to also help homeowners access financing at a lower rate. This I won't stay on for too long. It'll go out in the packet afterwards. And then moving on to the transit-oriented communities bill. So this, again, is at a very high level, looking throughout kind of the Front Range region and recognizing that we need more housing in the region. We also need transit systems that work in the region. And as we've been talking to people throughout the past several months, the topic always comes back of, we haven't had great transit in the state before, and how do we know if we're going to build new housing near transit that we're going to get a transit system? What we've said is these issues are really in parallel. You can't have transit without housing, and it's better for housing if you build it near transit because it lowers costs for people. They have better access to transit to move throughout the region, and you have more vibrant economic bases of communities. So what this would do is designates communities throughout the Front Range that have transit in them and develop some housing opportunity goals to ensure that there aren't any barriers to develop more or dense focused housing near transit areas. I'll just leave this up for a second, but these are the general communities that this would apply to in your area, primarily Longmont. But again, it's a lot of communities that have had transit for a fair amount of time, and making sure that we are able to incentivize and provide a stronger ridership base through locating housing near transit. For the incentives that would help support this program, the main one would be a TOC infrastructure fund. For communities that meet these goals, they would have access to $35 million for things like water, sewer upgrades, street upgrades, pedestrian upgrades. A lot of things that we hear are significant barriers to having new construction, new housing happen in infill environments. And then another aspect would be transit-oriented communities affordable housing tax credit, which would basically boost the existing state affordable housing tax credits by $30 million specifically for areas near transit. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Nathan as far as how you would calculate those housing opportunity goals.
Thanks, John. There's a lot of detail in these parts, and so we've been told we have way too many words on these slides, but we're kind of doing it on purpose just to be able to provide as much information on the legislation. And we really want to work with the staff, especially and the elected officials as well, on these issues because they get fairly technical around zoning, and we're trying to create a system here where everybody's got a housing opportunity goal. Each one of the 31 jurisdictions, which I think as John said, kind of going north, there's Longmont, and then also Fort Collins, I believe, is the only. Longmont's, I think, not North Front Range, still Dr. Cog, but in North Front Range, I think Fort Collins is the only jurisdiction that has the 15-minute frequent transit service that would would be what qualifies a municipality as a transit-oriented community. So anyways, as I go through this, think about it along those lines. We're mostly talking about Fort Collins and North Front Range. I think Greeley has a campus shuttle that runs at 15-minute service, but it's not a public campus shuttle, so Greeley's out. But what also would be available to everyone else is who's not a transit-oriented community and doesn't have the frequent transit is we'll have these neighborhood centers that we'll be setting up as a separate part of this. And so if you don't have the frequent transit yet, but you still want to access these funding sources and grants, and you've got a neighborhood center that maybe has, some transit, but it's not great transit, and it may have like a downtown area or Main Street where things are walkable, and it makes sense as an area for multifamily housing or apartments or condos, whatever it might be, that those areas you can designate as neighborhood centers, and it's just an opt-in kind of incentivized thing, and would still be available. So the steps on this slide get into a lot of detail of how the housing opportunity goals is calculated, and then how people would or cities would identify their transit-oriented centers. So you'll mostly get this in, you can go to the next slide, John. You get this in the in your packet and can read more. And then if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with us. But this shows the types of jurisdictions that it applies to. And this we're kind of getting into some detail of different levels of population or medium housing income. And that's just trying to account for factors like jobs, housing balance, and making sure that the communities that it applies to make sense as far as, the types of areas where more dense housing makes sense. Next slide. So as I was saying, this is based on kind of like 15-minute service for bus corridors if you're a community that has these transit corridor areas, or if you've got rail stations. And so this is talking about how then you would start to calculate the housing opportunity goal and what would be needed for that. Next slide. Again, just going more into detail around the calculations and how it works as far as like, you don't need to put them in mobile home parks and industrial areas, but really looking for those other areas that make sense for more dense development. Next slide. Exempt parcels are not required to be included, as I was just saying, and this is kind of a list of them. Next slide. So then this gets into a lot of details around, when the transit-oriented communities are assessing what's our existing zoning, and then how does this existing zoning we have meet the housing opportunity goal that has been set, and what are the kind of factors. So I won't go into details, but as you'll get the slides and can take a look at it. Next. And here's a graphic showing kind of what the typical transit corridor might look like, where you've got a mix of single family uses, mobile home parks, mixed use zoning areas, multifamily areas, all around kind of a transit station. So there's a lot of flexibility in the policy to say, some of these areas where we think make sense for the denser development are right on the transit station. But then as we've talked to a lot of communities, there'll be situations where the transit station is on one side of an interstate and there's not really good access to the other side of the interstate. So then the community in that case would likely just locate multifamily housing on one side of the transit station, but not the other. And that's kind of what we're trying to show here. Next slide. This gets into, all the options that a community would have to meet the housing opportunity goal. And so there's just so many different ways to get there. And that's what we're trying to show is like, this is a very high level goal. And there's, depending on every community would do different ways to get there based on what makes sense for them, whether it's adding height to the zoning districts or more area, different dimensional standards. You could even look at things like light industrial zones or commercial zones. So lots of options. Next slide. And then also looking at like other ways to like consider water supply shortages, which is obviously critical. We need to make sure that folks with challenges there are being taken into consideration. And then also regional partnerships. And this is specifically applies a lot to DRCOG. They're kind of working on these regional housing needs assessments right now. So we want to think about how this policy can work with what they're doing and involving the region, because the more we can then integrate transportation, where those investments are going, along with where the zoning is going through these regional partnerships is going to be a really key aspect to future success. So lots of work still to go on these items, but things we're working through. So then there would be some criteria around, there would be a report from the communities to DOLA by January 1st, 2025 to kind of say, here's where we think we're at around our zoning and how that meets these goals. And so basically you can kind of get early eligibility for incentives through that. A lot of communities we think will probably already meet the goals. And then we'll work with the communities that don't as of yet. Next slide. So our best guess kind of with those 31 communities from doing some scan of the zoning is there's probably about somewhere between 20 to 40% that are already meeting the goals with their current zoning. And then in the other categories, there's like some things that are kind of more simpler items that you can do in the zoning code that don't really have a huge impact. And then other communities that may have more work to do. So we want to work with the local communities and their planning staff to kind of figure out where they would fall, and then what their best options are. Next slide. And I'll kick it back over to you, John, for this one.
Yeah, and so this is the open implementation timeline that Nathan mentioned. So that initial deadline would be 2025 for folks to do that initial reporting to DOLA. And again, if they already meet requirements, that's great. They would then be eligible to apply for incentive funding. If they don't, the first deadline wouldn't be until December 1st, 2026. At that point, a jurisdiction who isn't meeting these housing opportunity goals would have their share of HUTF highway user tax funds distributions withheld. And that would just be held until zoning is updated. So if they update the zoning and meet those requirements a couple months after that, up until December 31st, 2027, they would receive any withheld HUTF distributions. So the ultimate kind of deadline is December 31st, 2027. That's when housing opportunity rules would become state law. So all jurisdictions this applies to would have to meet it. If jurisdictions aren't meeting it by that timeline, they still wouldn't be able to receive HUTF distributions up until they do comply with the state law. So that's kind of high level, and as the sponsors are going to mention throughout stakeholder meetings, these are kind of concept draft ideas for implementation. We are certainly interested in hearing from people and talking about how this could work. I think the main thing that the sponsors and governor are interested in is finding ways to support local communities that are doing this work and making sure they're able to provide significant and adequate housing near transit, both to increase the housing supply, but then also build that transit base. And what we've seen from pretty much every other state throughout the country is that doing a policy like this purely based on incentives, purely based on other kind of rules like that just doesn't work. We've never seen that work in any other state. And so that's where there's a strong feeling of needing to tie this to funds and having some kind of implementation requirements. And that is the end of our presentation. Now, it was a lot of information. Like we said, we'll send out the slides and are happy to come back and answer any questions. But thank you very much for having me.
Since we're running 10, 15 minutes behind,
how much farther behind do you want to run? I can put you an hour, 2 hours back.
Well, I suggest we get
It's fun playing Sim City with other people.
Yeah, my God. I suggest we get the presentation and add any questions, get back to the gentleman.
Could I ask
Yes,
just
absolutely.
clarifying questions?
Yep.
So Nathan and John, I think you and I talked about this, but can you give us a sense if we implement the ADUs and the TODs, what percentage of the housing shortage would that address?
So it's, there's not a, I guess, direct correlation. I assume you're asking specifically for North Front Range MPO, if those communities did. So that part of that would probably, we would get more data through the strategic growth bill that would look into some of the housing needs requirements there. Really, what a lot of this is building, trying to remove the barriers that prevent a lot of the housing being built from right now. And again, what we've seen in a lot of other states is when you remove those barriers, I think different communities have seen ADUs increase, I want to say between 20 and 60% uptake. Similarly with TLCs, with transit-oriented communities, removing a lot of these public process barriers and things like that, do see more development occurring in those areas. I can't give you a specific number though.
Okay, I think that helps. And then the other thing on the TOD side, it is tied to transit. So if a community doesn't have transit or does not have transit that meets the 15-minute headways, then this doesn't apply? Is that the understanding?
Correct. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's pretty much where there's the light rail and the RTD system, and then the other BRT and bus routes there, and then the only qualifying transit is in Fort Collins and North Front Range. And the other thing we're saying is this is kind of just based on a snapshot in time. So if what we don't want to do is make anybody feel that if you work to get improved transit that somehow these will apply retroactively. It's just based on a snapshot of here's what's existing right now, or in your like long range transportation plan. And that's one thing we might want to talk more to the staff for North Front Range about, is just make sure we understand your long range transportation plan around BRT and stuff, but as we work out the details. But overall, yeah, it's really only applying to Fort Collins.
Okay, any quick questions we can take? Otherwise, we'll move on. All right, thank you, Nathan. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Let's move on to our one and only action item, which is the 2023 call for projects. Becky, where are you, Becky? There's Becky.
He's just getting me to the right spot. Good evening. You get me this evening. Anna Rose is on vacation, which is a good thing. So the call for projects, as you had last month, you had a presentation from all of the project sponsors, from those projects that are being recommended for funding, either fully or partially, and that we had all of those presentations. There are 12 fully funded and 1 partially funded project being recommended. There has been a change, as you can see on this slide here, there has been a change at the federal level. So every year at the end of the fiscal year, CDOT does a reconciliation and a review of the projected funds that we had from the feds for these various programs, and then what the actuals were. There was a smaller amount of money that was allocated from the feds for the state as a whole, but for us specifically, it was just under $630,000, give or take. The biggest programs that took a hit were CMAQ and CRP. We had reserved funding in SDBG and TA, so that was not an issue. And the TA one is so small that it really didn't impact anything. What this ended up doing is the lowest scoring projects for these 2 funding sources are being partially funded now, just because we don't have that full funding amount. As you can see, for this one, this is the Loveland project, the Wilson Avenue Multi-Use Path and Crossing. So this is the CRP funds. That will be, instead of being fully funded, it will now be funded at $40,000 less. And then the other one is in CMAQ. which is the Greeley 9th and 10th Street Mobility Improvements Project, will be funded at about $2 million less. What this means is that if and
2
when.
million or 200,000?
200,000, sorry.
Pick yourself off the floor. Hold on, I'm looking at a different number.
Sorry, this is,
Okay, I'm
you have the
good.
B team, sorry. I apologize. Yes, 1,000. What this means is when additional funds come in, these two projects, for these two funding sources, these two projects will just automatically be made whole with the amount that was recommended for funding they applied for. And then it's being called waitlisted, but it's not the same as the projects below the red line that would have to come back to council and present and be approved. So these two projects will be made whole if and when additional funds come up to the amount that they requested and were recommended to be funded for. The other two programs are fine, and nothing was changed there. And so at their meeting in December, TAC did recommend with these two changes and the waitlisting of these two projects for the funding that may come in the future, are recommending Planning Council approve the COPA project as presented.
Any questions, Becky? All right, if not, let's move on to page.
Mr. Chairman,
We need.
I move we approve resolution number 2024-01 of the North Front Range Transportation Air Quality Planning Council adopting the 2023 COPA project.
Second. What's the second?
Wow, now all of a sudden we're nervous. All right, any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent.
And Becky, you're not the teacher, you're the.
And just had trouble with comments is all.
This is just all.
Tell everybody they did a great job. One comment, 2 comma, heck, it's all the same.
And you can,
The TAC, thank you for all the hard, because it really, all the details come out of the TAC, so good job, guys.
Becky, you stay right there.
Yeah.
We'll move on to targets for safety performance.
This one?
Projects used to be
And just do this right. Maybe. There we go, okay. Yeah, so our discussion item this evening is targets for safety performance measures. This is one that we do every year, let's see if I can annually, that we have done since 2014. I believe this is the 7th time that we have done this. So it's maybe 2016. So these are set annually by state DOTs, and then NPOs have 180 days to adopt either their own target or to support a state's target. So this is across the country. These are targets based on a 5-year rolling average. So this one this year will be 2020 to 2024. And they must be data driven. They cannot be aspirational. These have to be data driven. And new established targets have to be incorporated whenever there's an update to an RTP or a TIP. So for us, the next time we would adopt a new TIP, which will hopefully be before we do an RTP, we would have to incorporate these new targets. So there are two options, as I said. Either we can support the state's targets or we can set our own targets. We have historically, every time that we've had to do this in the past, we have supported CDOT's targets. But this year we are recommending that we might want to think about setting our own region-specific targets, and I will get into that here in just a little bit. Just one thing that we do want to point out, there is no acceptable number of deaths or serious injuries on our roadway networks. We do have a safety vision for the MPO that we adopted back in 2020. We also know that several of our member communities have safety visions and are working towards this. Several have received SS4A, so Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, to do plans to help reduce fatalities and serious injuries. And so this is something that we do want to recognize and we want to take credit for, which is part of the reason why we are recommending now going with our own regional target. As I said, we have supported the statewide target since the inception of this process. The statewide targets and fatalities, unfortunately, have been trending upward. And as I said, we're continuing to focus within our region on bringing those numbers down and being able to reflect what we are doing and the good work that our communities are doing in the region, in our targets. So this shows what the CDOT statewide targets are, what they were in 2018 to 22, 2019 to 23, and then this current one is the purple column here. And as you can see, they are going in the wrong direction, which is upward. And so this is a 5-year average using actual numbers for the first 2 years and then forecasted numbers, because obviously we don't have the data yet for 23, but we do have the data for 20, 21, and 22. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the numbers and compare CDOT. So for me, it's on the left, and our NPO is on the right. And we'll go through those. There's about 4 of them, I believe, that we'll walk through. So this is fatality. As you can see, the state one is moving in an upward trend with a small dip in 2019. We also had quite a drop in 2019. No reason really why, other than that was a really good year for that. And then we went back up. 2020 was not a great year for a lot of areas, and then we've gone back down, and we're sort of.
2020 had less travel.
But people were driving faster, and so.
I got there faster.
Well, maybe.
Don't take
So,
it personally.
as you can see, we're sort of holding steady, whereas the state is continuing to increase. And then for serious injuries, again, we had some dips. So as in the state, and then it jumped back up, but the state is continuing to increase, and we are as well, but it's at a slightly lower rate. And then the non-motorized trends, which is another one that we have to look at, which takes into account fatalities and serious injuries together into one number. Again, we have a couple of anomalies, but we're trending lower, whereas the state is not quite in that direction. So this compares what the rates are between the CDOT option. So if we support the state's targets, that's purple. If we want to do our own, that is orange. And I know these are called targets, and that's an unfortunate name from the federal level. It is the number we do not want to exceed. So we don't want to hit it by any means, but we don't want to go past it. And so we want to stay below it. And a lot of NPOs around the country have said, can we please name it something else, but it's staying targets. So that's the unfortunate acronym that we have, or name we have. But as you can see, CDOT numbers on the purple column, and then the NPO ones that we have for our region are in the orange column. So we would like to ask planning council, what are your thoughts on having a region specific target versus just supporting the state's target, being able to take into consideration the work that is happening, and that is something that we take into consideration since the last 2 years are projected. So we are able to take into account, for instance, Fort Collins saying they want to reduce, crashes and fatalities by a certain percent. We can incorporate that into our target for the region, whereas it would just, help in the CDOT target, which is a good thing, but we don't take that into consideration for our region. Another thing to note is we can change our mind next year if we wanted to. If we don't like this next year or the numbers change, we can always go back to supporting the state's targets. It's up to us, the MPO, what to do from year to year. And there are no penalties.
Can we mix and match? I mean, like serious injury rate 6.5 and we go up to 6.7. Can we take the 6.5?
Don't know that we can, because it has to be data driven, we have to pick one or the other. So we can.
I just had to ask.
Well, no, that's a good question.
It just looks a little weird that we're going to be a little higher than the state.
Yeah, but everything else, yeah. And we are Region 4. I believe it was at STAC in November, a recent STAC. Region 4 is doing the best out of the regions within the state at reducing fatalities and at the best at safety. So taking that into consideration.
But we're not reducing their numbers because there was the place speak STAC rep said.
They tried to take money away. They didn't.
No, we shouldn't punish them because they're doing good. And that wasn't even us. So someone else backed us.
That's kind of my simple sided question. What happens if we don't meet our goals?
For MPOs, there is no punitive, there's no penalty. For states, there are. For the states, the penalty is they have to use their HSIP funds for safety projects, which is what they should be doing anyway. We don't have control over HSIP funds. the NPO, we just don't have any safety funds.
Faster safety and all the safety programs are
State.
state.
I rebel against paperwork drills that result in no action and no, it's a paperwork drill, but can we use these numbers in some manner? If we decide that we want to drive ourselves to be, poor English, but more safe, the state as a whole, do we then, or should we then consider when we do call for projects as safety having a higher weight than maybe it normally would? You see, I mean, if we are going to emphasize safety over and above what the state does, then we should put it into action by saying, you know, when it comes time for us to spend our limited funds, these are where they're going to go.
Yeah, one of the things that frustrates me, and it's frustrated me for my entire career, is if you look at the safety numbers from 2013 to 2023, I bet you there hasn't been a significant increase in dollars in that time frame, and we've increased in population significantly. So they say safety is important, right? We always say safety is important, but then we come and we do our call for projects in greenhouse gas and emissions and air quality, and people over 65 get the highest numbers and safety gets the smallest number. It's the way it works, and that's the way we've done business. And then faster safety can't be used for proactive approaching, it only can be used for that if so many people died.
I'm just saying.
So we gotta make a point. Safety is gonna be important.
We gotta put our quote unquote money where our mouth is. If we're gonna create a goal like this, then we should be able to
make a difference.
Well, it seems that I read that the serious injuries and deaths nationally were trending slightly downward, and we're trending upward. I mean, I imagine that has something to do with population increases. But at the end of the day, I prefer to focus on our region versus the bigger number, unless there's a reason not to, which it sounds like maybe there isn't financially anyway.
Historically, we didn't have data, and it was very difficult to get the data in a timely fashion. And so we just supported the state's targets simply because we didn't have the data. We've gone through a process where the data, and now that doesn't seem to be something that we will need to do because now the data comes geocoded, which is fantastic for Anna Rose.
Do you want to say what geocoding means?
Sorry, that's the lat long of where the incident occurred. So when we do the GIS mapping and to see where the different incidents happened, it comes with that already in there, as opposed to having to run separate programs to figure out where the latitude and longitude, where it actually is. Is it in our NPO versus is it not? So, but so it is coming in those, which is very helpful. But we do have safety criteria in the call for projects, but we can change the weighting and the points.
I'm just making a point that if we're gonna come out and say, this is our target, this is our goal, then our ultimate actions down the line have to reflect what our targets and goals are. And if we're going to say we are going to exceed, or our effort is to lower the threshold of deaths and serious injuries on our region roadways, then we ought to back it up with our money. That's all I'm saying.
In conjunction with CDOT funding, because we could double our efforts if we do that with their priorities and our priorities.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying.
I agree with you.
Otherwise, this is just a paperwork drill.
To me, they're not.
And we also can take into account a lot of, once the studies are completed, the Safe Streets and Roads for All, Weld County has one, Greeley received one, Larimer got one, and I feel like somebody else got one. Or maybe somebody else got one.
Did you get one? Did I get the one?
They keep releasing them in batches and it's kind of killer. But several communities have gotten them, and so we can take those, once those plans are completed, we can take that into account as well. So
Do we need to vote on this now?
No, this will come back as an action item in February. This does have to go to, they're due, the targets are due, so whatever we decide, whatever the council decides to do, we have to submit that by February 27th to CDOT. So whether that is going with CDOT's target or our own, it's a resolution, and we have to provide that.
But it'd be good to get some headlines so they know where they're going.
I mean, I think we should go with our own data. I mean, first of all, we've taken the time to figure out what those numbers are. And second of all, I mean, the CDOT numbers feel astronomically high. And we've always talked about how we wish that it could be aspirational, and we've even adopted the Vision Zero. And so, you know, the whole thing feels distasteful, not just because it's a paper exercise, but also because it just feels like we're talking about people's lives, and it seems so such a careless way to do so. And it's no one's fault in this room, it's just the way it is. But so I prefer going with those smaller numbers, which feel a little more palatable to me.
And I agree, if it doesn't work, we change, right?
Right, I agree too.
Gives us a way out.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, Commissioner, I think having the local stuff's the best.
This is the article I was reading yesterday from the New York Times. Why are American drivers so deadly? And I mean, we're seeing a huge increase in fatalities, and if we can help lower it in our area by having a better goal.
Sure. Well, I'm curious what the culmination of the article was. Why? Did they get to that?
Yeah, basically COVID.
Really? Not cell
It was
phone?
COVID.
Well, let's blame
People
everything on
started driving
COVID.
better.
Yeah, let me answer. There you go.
Distracted driving is.
Look at me, I'm the New York Times.
I mean, we all have here. There's nobody in this room that can't say they haven't been distracted drivers in the last 6 months.
Sure.
And that's a bill, isn't there a bill? A hands-free bill?
Yeah, it really has a hands-free policy. You can't talk on your phone in state.
I thought the state had one.
But
No, it's coming up.
Really? I got pulled over in California years ago. I'm surprised we don't have any.
You can't be looking at the phone, but you can have it on speaker.
All right.
That's a hands-free.
I think we gave you some, I think we're leaning towards. All right, but you have to have a final vote.
Good job, Chair.
Move on.
All righty then, we are now to number 14, which is changing the Articles of Association. Suzette?
Yeah, so on page 33 in your packet, I think Alex will be probably pulling that in a minute on the screen. But for all of us that lived through the House Bill 1101 changes, where we were looking at the boundaries and also administrative changes, the one big change that came in our region was that our stack representatives between the North Front Range and Upper Front Range could not be from the same jurisdiction. So it can't be from both, can't be from Laramie County, or both can't be from Weld County. That's our overlap. So to make that change and the modification going in front of the Transportation Commission, the change, if you can see where I said, excuse me, Article 2 under officers, the underlying section is the portion that, sorry, Alex, are you looking squishy? That underlying section is the addition to that. It just says that we would coordinate with them so that no one jurisdiction represents both agencies. And then small administrative change on the mobility committee. Since we have this open, we have to have 21-day public comment on this, or open for public comment. Our Laramie County Mobility Committee and our Weld County Mobility Committees now do meet periodically combined throughout the year. And so that's just adding that, and they're making a recognition that we have also these combined meetings. And so there's the link to the full articles if you're interested in that, but those are essentially the changes.
That doesn't mean approval.
No, we're just discussing today.
This is just a discussion, but the council does have to pass a resolution to make the change.
Any discussion since we're talking about this?
Let's just close this can of worms.
It is closed. All right, council reports. Mr. Kelly, Commissioner Kelly, I'd like to go first.
So we had, our meeting was totally remote this time around. It was a little bit shorter. We, as usual, had a lot of budget information that we went through. We went over bridge and tunnel special district, bond issuance, so a lot of financial stuff. the most interesting thing I guess that was discussed was the right-of-way access to CDOT's facilities so that we could have broadband access across the state. So rural broadband access and the pricing discussion, around that. How are we going to price access to CDOT's facilities? And the rural folks have been, pushing to have it be as inexpensive as possible, and it's been a long process. The commission had to either vote or push it, and decided to vote on it and set the pricing. The pricing had to be competitive with other states. So over time, the price that CDOT was proposing dropped by 90%. And the rural communities still weren't happy about it. But the commission basically voted it in. And what it comes down to is it was a nickel a foot, 5 cents a foot to build access into CDOT's right of way. And then annually, it was 3 cents a foot. This is only for rural, on a continuing basis if a community wanted access to CDOT's facilities. It's not a moneymaker for CDOT, period, but the rural people, we punted it to legislation because rural wasn't going to be happy unless we were paying them to, access our facilities, or it was free or whatever. So anyway, the pricing was set, and a couple of commissioners voted against it, but 9 out of the 11 voted for the pricing there. Yeah, and that's questions about that at all, or?
It's interesting that it's already, at least in my day job, we already have, large fiber lines going down the US highways and the interstate highways, and to some detriment actually, because a couple of years back, there was a major incident out on I-70, not I-70, 76, where they essentially clipped the fiber that fed the northeast half of the state. There's no redundancy out there, so I'm kind of, what has CDOT's been policy been in the past? Because obviously there's lines in the ground now along our interstates and our US highways. Is this a radical change from that policy?
From a pricing perspective, yes. I can't tell you what they charge somebody for access over the past year, seeing as I've been the commissioner for 3 months. But it's a very different pricing structure, much cheaper than anything that's been offered in the past. Heather, you behind me?
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't have a policy before.
Yeah.
We didn't, but fiber is not considered a public utility,
Yeah,
so that's the issue.
One of the issues, yeah.
One of the issues. We've been allowing them to use our right of way free, just like we let municipals, water lines, sewer lines use our right of way for free.
So
So there was,
if it was used for public telephony, is that not, that's still not, since it's a regulated utility?
No, it's not a regulated utility, so.
no, not regulated. So there was an executive order, I believe, that said we needed to come up with a fee structure to, and we're not, a lot of other states do this. We're probably the cheapest as far as the fee structure goes. Rural areas are just, the thing is it's not going to be retroactive. So all of your big municipalities, right, Denver, Fort Collins, where we are, They've got all their fiber and all their conduit they're all active. They won't go retro. You don't have to pay for that. So that's the beef with the rural communities, is they don't have access today, and then they're gonna have to be paying a annual fee to lease that right of way.
So my question to you is, with the governor's initiative, to get broadband and fiber and internet connection to all rural communities, does that put a damper on people wanting to do it?
I have no clue. I honestly, it's on, I followed some of it. I mean, there's a lot of dollars that the fee is so nominal. I mean, it's honestly, it's more administrative to even just collect the fee than what we're charging them. So the whole thing's been quite unique, and I haven't fully understood
The legislature has to address it. CDOT can't just address it by a pricing thing, that's it. How do you do maintenance? Who bills? How do you collect? All that stuff, CDOT doesn't have the capability to do any of that, and it's not funded to do it. The legislature, it's like old phone access, where it used to be, it was priced on a demand basis, a supply and demand basis, and then the government came in and said, no, wait a second, we're gonna put money towards this. There's no money towards this. So it's the legislature's issue, and we can't address it. And by law, by rule, we have to be competitive with other states. And I doubt it, 3 cents.
Or even the private industry.
Yeah, well, and most of the fiber that's coming in is private.
So it needs to be addressed at a higher level. And that's my report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's move on to Heather. R4 update. Heather, you're back there, right?
Yeah, I'm back here.
All right.
Not a ton of updates, but since we're talking about new legislation, there is a new bill that is being run that's looking at our maintenance projects. And we were hoping, a couple of years ago, so when we do an in-house maintenance project, we are capped at $150,000. So if the project costs more than $150,000.
For roadway paving.
For roadway paving. We have to go out and compete it. 3 years ago, they raised that ceiling to 250, but it's still, that 150 was set for like 20 years. So we were hoping the new bill was gonna increase that maybe to 350 or 500, but what they're gonna do is they're gonna put an inflation clause. So that is something that the CDOT is in support of. I cannot remember all the other legislative bills, but next time, and Emily does it typically, once they kind of get pared down, she does a pretty good job of kind of suggesting which ones CDOT's in favor of and what are the benefits. This is one that is really coming more from eastern Colorado, because especially in our remote areas, for us to pay a contractor to get out there, we're getting a quarter done maybe of what our own forces can do. So we're trying to spend those dollars a little wiser. Other than that, other things, but I-25 obviously is moving along. It looks like we are going to get our first construction package, or at least the negotiation, at the end of March for segment 5. We could probably see barrier starting to get placed May timeframe. And so the first kind of construction work we're going to be doing is in the median. So I would anticipate the slowdowns as we set barrier come this May, but I'll have more updates for that. And then a lot of good progress on Peckham, and we're looking to wrap that project up here in the next couple of months. I think you guys have all the updates on all the other projects, so keep it short.
Heather, I got a quick question. I think it was in the Loveland paper where obviously third lane's free for a while.
Yeah.
But if you cross the
Double lane.
dotted lane, they catch it. Is that true? I don't have a problem with it.
We do not, we'll keep it right here. The ticketing is not up yet on our segment. So when we get the toll lanes, when we get all the tolling and testing done, our intent is to have those monitors up as well, so we can issue tickets. But that technology is not yet installed. So it is in effect though down in segments 3 and 2, and I think in the gap.
So
The gap, I think, went live this week, finally.
just don't cross the double
Don't
line.
cross the double white.
Yeah.
So is there gonna be additional signage that goes up there?
Yes, there will be additional signage there.
Is that springtime?
Yeah, we had some contracting task order issues with the new vendor. So they have actually not started the tolling and testing, but it looks like we're getting, that we just kind of got resolved. So I think, here in the coming month, they will start getting out there, but it's usually, the tolling and testing is usually a 3 to 6 month period. So I would anticipate tolls to be free until we start hitting summertime.
Sounds like a bonus to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather.
It's a really nice drive if you haven't taken it.
All right. Speaking of fines and reporting and everything, we do not have a handout from the CTIO office, and Cecil's not here that I know of. So we'll move on to I-25 Coalition. Commissioner James?
In the interest of an abbreviated meeting, sir. I-25 Coalition continues to meet, continues to be effective. In fact, we're seeing more and more folks, the folks from Wellington are beginning to join us. Good activity on that board. I encourage you to attend if you can. And that is my report, sir.
Thank you so much. US 34, your last report.
Oh, okay, I'll make it good then, I'll make it nice and long. So we had a couple items on the agenda today. One was the CDOT received a grant from the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, for exploring the railroad crossing elimination program. So it received $700,000, and they matched that with $200,000 of their own money. They're looking at grade crossings on 34. Looks like it would be an 18-month study project, and then would look at how to, how to fix that issue on 34. CDOT also mentioned that they need to know the plans for development on 34, and so they are reconvening the TAC group that they had worked with in the past to make sure that they're aware of what's going on 34 with regard to development, especially in the more open areas. We also discussed that we have a contractor now to work with us on the TMO. That company is called STEER, STEER. And we met Jeff and Paroma from the STEER group. Looks like we'll be scheduling some kind of retreat, so they can tour the corridor and we can kind of show them what we're envisioning. Also, Estes Park is still sort of a nominal member of both the TMO and the 34 Coalition, although they will be paying money for their portion, which is
already paid money.
they've already paid their money. So they're going to decide in future years if they want to formally join us. And then the meetings for 34 will move to once a month because there will be a lot to discuss in the coming months. That's it.
And the new chair is?
Oh, and the new chair is Barry Wilson,
Drum roll, please.
and the vice chair is Scott James. And so that'll be my last report.
You can stay in the box and handle next.
NATME, we did not have a meeting in December. We will meet again January 25th. We will continue to discuss program eligibility and criteria proposals, hopefully to have something ready soon so we can get some of those dollars out the door. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Will and Johnny, anything left to say about Front Range?
I would say we pretty much got an update tonight.
Certainly did.
Anything you want to add?
Johnny, that's so unusual.
We had them here, we didn't have to talk about it.
All right, cool. Mayor Carspet, thank you for having us. Do you have any comments?
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and I'm sorry about the change of address. We were approved for a micro-mobility grant by Congressman Caraballo's office in the congressionally designated spending.
So it's been about 5 months. It's been held up, but for Bertha, that was kind of her choice. So hopefully that'll come out soon. And in that case, we'll have phone and an app-based service through a minivan. We visited Superior to see how they do theirs. So it'll be pretty interesting for our area. Longmont's also going for that too. If you drive around to see, we finally have bike lanes in town, so that striping started and finished this year. We're putting up our artwork at I-25. We are submitting a Spartan application, which is by our high school, for another crossing on a railroad, which has been 2 decades in the works. And we just got our comments back from the railroad. So hopefully we'll do that, even though every other push is to eliminate more stops. We've already gone through town and eliminated one in order to open this one up. Issued 235 residential permits last year, and just opened our McDonald's. So on your way out, going northbound, you'll see the Taco Bell, Domino's, Come and Go. Funny story, the golf course thought they owned that land, and after they bought it, they realized they didn't. Talked to that landowner, and he said, no, I'm keeping it, and then shortly after, we have all this fast food right there. Yeah, finally with rail, I don't want to end on a bad note, but it's not very good looking for Berthoud. But I just hope Longmont or Loveland and Fort Collins really enjoy your stops. We're kind of the collateral damage on that, getting 110 mile per hour trains going through town.
It keeps going.
It does keep going up. Went up 3 times in 1 week. Longmont had the kindness of their heart set up a meeting for us with David Singer, and he said, well, we'll have a conversation tomorrow about secondary stops, but he wants 75 to 90 mile per hour. Then that meeting yesterday, they pulled out 110, and then David Singer in that meeting said, actually, we're not going to have a conversation about secondary stops. Yeah, I don't want to leave on a note. Thank you all for coming, though, and I hope you enjoy your night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
As usual.
I want to recognize a lot of the CDOT folks, and it's good seeing their
Oh, yeah.
smiling faces here tonight. And we see at the US 34 Coalition. Thank you for being here.
We missed you, Johnny.
We miss you.
That's why we came. If you have any suggestions, let us know, myself or Suzette. Other than that, we're done.
We see a lot of the local folks here.
Do you guys have an idea
We
what-
do.